This week, I had the opportunity to sit and have a conversation with Emily McMason. She is a true gem in our local community, and I was so excited to be able to use this platform and amplify her voice. She is such an amazing coach for families and women and teens and tweens. She has a Return to Me program that really helps women dive deep into who they used to be and bringing some of that back out into the world to shine. And I could not stop talking to her. I think we could have had the conversation last for hours. And actually, one of the things that we had talked about after we stopped after the record button was stopped and we were just, collecting our thoughts, she had said that in the experience that she's had with her son living out and launched into the world, her relationship now is so much better with him because she has been able to eliminate all the task motherly, make sure you do this. Have you done that? Please do this, help with this. And that gives me hope for my relationship with my children in the future. And I hope it can give you some hope that, while we're in the weeds and the thick of it with all the task driven transactional work we need to do as mothers to keep the ship afloat, when we step out of that mothering stage, it might be a hard transition, but there's also so much beauty on the other side of it. So I hope you enjoy this talk. Welcome to Women Mastering Midlife, where we dive deep into the rich complexities of womanhood in our middle years. I'm your host, Victoria Bird, pharmacist, certified women's health coach, and your guide on this transformative journey. Whether you're navigating perimenopause, thriving in menopause, or mastering midlife's many transitions, this is your weekly dose of expert guidance, compassionate support, and a judgment-free space to explore it all. So get cozy, hit that play button, and let's rewrite the narrative around this remarkable stage from being something to dread into a beautiful transition. So I'm really excited to have a friend and a fellow neighbor in the community join me today. I am joined today by Emily McMason. She is a coach and consultant in private practice. With a master's degree from Harvard, she works on the personal side of life counseling individuals, couples, whole families, teens, and tweens. On the professional side, her clients include schools, businesses, and government agencies. But most importantly for our conversation today, Emily is a mom to a 23-year-old son and an 18-year-old daughter, so she's right in the midst of midlife shift as her kids are launching their own lives into the world. So thank you so much for coming to talk to me today, Emily.
It is an honor to be here. Thank you very much for asking me. When we started talking about it, I was just thrilled. So thank you.
I think that this time of year, it's a really important topic because we're seeing, my children aren't quite yet to the age where they're launching out into the world, but there are a lot of moms that I talk to that are having this experience of their kids are going to graduate. They might be going off to college or a trade school, or they might be wanting to move out and work and live on their own. And that's a really big shift for someone who spent the last, 18 years taking care of these little people. So I wanted to talk to you today on, kind of the transition and some healthy ways to get through that transition, rediscover yourself, maybe find new passions, and also develop some healthy boundaries around life with an adult child.
Yep, absolutely.
So first of all, in talking with women who have graduating teens and adults who are young adults who are stay-at-home parents. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was the forced retirement of a stay-at-home mom. I see that looming in my future. My oldest is a freshman, and I feel that coming down the pike. And for so long, I hung up my career coat as a pharmacist to stay home with them. And it became my whole world was taking care of them, making sure they're healthy and well-rounded individuals to put out in the world. But so what are some things that you see in your clients and ways that you help them navigate, that, oh my gosh, I'm going to be out of a job soon?
Mm-hmm. I think that it's so multifaceted. It's, when a baby is first born, we do everything for them. We help them, we feed them, we help them sleep, we keep them cuddled and warmed and loved and all those things. And over the years, we do and do and do less for them. By the time they're 18, they're doing the things. Conversely, kind of going the other direction, when they're little, we're hardly still with them. We're always in the doing. And what happens is that we're being next to them more and more and more and more. So that the net actually doesn't change, but the functionality of what we're doing as parents, as mothers, changes. And oftentimes that letting go of the doing to embrace the being with, like, that's a hard place to navigate. Like, really, I'm just supposed to sit here while you're feeling big feelings, or I'm supposed to reflect back to you what I'm hearing you say about the choices you want to be making. But I think one of the things as our kids hit those teen years, when high school starts, is if we can start to hang up our doing shoes and sort of put on our being slippers, that can help us be ready for that change at, around 18. It feels less like a cliff that we're kind of falling off.
Yeah, I've noticed even with my girls, 13 and 15, and especially the 13-year-old, she'll get in the car after a long day at school or a long evening at dance, and she'll need to decompress and let it all out. And just, it's diarrhea of the mouth. Everything is coming at me. And I've learned the hard way to say, do you want me to listen, or do you want this to be a life lesson? Like, do you want my input? And most times they don't want my input.
No, and it's this fascinating thing. So it's the technical name for it's called externalization. And you're exactly right that they feel better after they've externalized to us. And usually we start to see that really marked shift as they enter puberty. They do a ton. It just becomes more evident. And you're exactly right that once they've done all that, we can kind of say to them, okay, do you want to be heard, helped, or hugged? And then they can let us know like what kind of intervention they need, because most of the time, they dump it on us and we're like, do I need to call a parent? Do I need to call a principal? Do I need to call the cops? Like, where does this land? And they feel fine afterwards because they've given it all to us. Just like when we go for a walk with a friend and talk something out, or, it's part of why therapy works. It's part of why for folks with faith, prayer works. All of those are that process of externalization. And so the kind of the view I always think of it as when my kids do it to me is like, I'm there to catch it, but with open fingers, because I actually want it to flow through. I don't want to get stuck holding the really hard stuff, because that'll be toxic to me too.
Yeah. It's so much to carry, because then, or they come in at 10 o'clock at night. Like, I'm in bed,
yes,
ready to
right?
go. I'm like in my sleep mode. And then I feel a body come in and sit on the end of the bed.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I don't want to send them away, because this is the opportunity for them to, to unload. But gosh, I'm tired. It stresses me out more. Then I want to fix it. For one, because I want to help them, but two, I want to go to bed.
Yes.
And so it's a really difficult transition to see them as not your children that you're caring and tending to, but people that are developing their own lives. And so do you have any suggestions for women to help them let go of that, like that control over their kids?
I think that, part of it is, especially for moms, when we had professional lives and then we shifted professions and parenting became our profession, is that piece of that my kids aren't the product of my work. My parenting is my product. So have I done all of the steps I wanted to take? Have I done the research or the reach out or whatever, and kind of keep everything on my half of the road? And that the product of who these kids are, that's on their side, right? Just like if an artist were to paint a picture, they can have all the intent in the world, but whomever is coming to look at that picture interprets it their own way. And so I think that that's part of it, is saying like, it's not healthy for us to attach to the outcome of who our kids become, because then for most of us, honestly, all we do is perseverate and get stuck on the things we think didn't go well, like we'll blame ourselves for anything that goes wrong. We will not celebrate and say like, woohoo, that was my accomplishment, right?
Yeah, I remember when they were younger. They're 26 months apart, and I was in the weeds, and we had just moved here. My husband was starting a new practice, and I was no longer working. And I remember sobbing to him, asking him to basically give me an annual review of my
Yes.
parenting because I needed
Yes.
that external validation because
Yes.
it's thankless. It never
Yep.
ends.
Yep.
And just having somebody come and say, like, yes, you're doing a good job. And I see that now when I see my children navigate things with other people or the way they're handling a tough situation with school, I feel like, okay, this is my annual review report. Like, I think I'm doing okay if they can navigate these things on their own. But as they're launching out into the world and they're not in your house to have those conversations at the end of the bed at 10 o'clock at night, how do we handle that? How do we just let them go?
Huh? Well, and I think that one of the ways to think about it is like when they were little, we were the trailblazer. We were ahead of them on the path. We were clearing the brush. We were, checking for things. And what happens as they get ready to go is that we slow our pace a little bit so that actually we're walking side by side so that now we're sort of offering them guidance so that they can grow. And the tools of being that guide are asking if they'd like our wisdom and asking them questions with curiosity. And so kind of knowing that our role now is to sort of help them filter their own inner knowing versus trying to teach them our values, our expectations, our whatever. So that if they come to us and they say like, my roommate's driving me crazy and I can't stand this, or they, go to a huge party right before midterms. Like when they were younger, we would have said things like, what were you thinking? And why would you make those choices? And can't you see that the outcome is going to be this? Now it's about saying like, oh, I'm so glad you let me know what's going on for you right now. It sounds like you're feeling a little overwhelmed from the last week. How are you doing? And, finals are going to be coming up in another 6 weeks, however long. Is there anything you want to do differently next time, as you prep for finals, even though our internal dialogue is like, what were you thinking? Right. Like,
oh yeah. Or remembering, because we do have the wisdom of age and experience. And many of us have been there where we chose to go to a party instead of studying for a final, or we had those 8 a.m. freshman classes. I don't know why colleges like to torment freshmen with 8 a.m. classes, but they
absolutely.
seem to. I mean, unless they've changed their ways. But when I was younger, the English 101, all those freshman courses were at 8 a.m. and you chose to sleep in instead of going. And then that becomes easier and easier to do.
Absolutely.
So I've been there and I've seen the repercussions, and it's very hard to not tell those children of yours what they should be doing and allowing them to make those mistakes on their own.
Yeah. And in part, I think, so often we all feel like, oh my gosh, if I just knew then what I know now. And part of it is if we knew then what we know now, we'd be very lonely. We'd be the only 20-year-old getting up for 8 a.m. classes.
Yep.
We'd be the only person making kale smoothies. We'd be the only one saying like, it's 9 o'clock and I need 7 to 9 hours of sleep. So I'm going to bed. Like it would be a very lonely part of their journey. And the reason we have wisdom is because we've accumulated those experiences. And I think actually to kind of loop back to part of what you'd asked earlier, we want to allow them the space to have those experiences. And it's still okay when they hit really third rail health and safety issues to call them out on it and say like, I have real health concerns for you about this. Like, I want you to really put the brakes on here, or we need to have a really, deep conversation about it, that it's still okay as parents to have that, knowing more and more what they do with the contents of that conversation is up to them.
And if you think about all the experiences that we did have, and then you look at the people we become, we did turn out okay.
Just fine. Yep.
It's good to remember that, yes, we made mistakes and we want our kids to not maybe repeat the same things. But even if they do, it may not be as awful as we're worried it could be.
And I think, so often people say like little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems, which I think is a really disservice to parents of littles, because the intensity of it, like a kid who misses a nap when they're 3, like that is a miserable, miserable afternoon. But with a 15 and a 13-year-old, you're sort of like, oh, I wish that was my biggest problem right now. I think that when kids are little, the arc of the problem is usually shorter. And when kids are older, the arc of worry is longer. And so we may be stressed from 1 p.m. till bedtime. Now we're stressed from 1 quarter to the next, or 1 year to the next, or, one half a decade to the next, that the time frame for how these things play out gets longer.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of women follow the same age path that we have. I feel like the next generations, they're having kids older. But for us, we are also navigating our own transitions. I mean,
Absolutely.
We're transitioning out of the ability to procreate, which to some is very exciting that that's over and done with. Yeah. But even if you are happy, there is some loss, because
yes.
You're no longer able to do what your body used to be able to do. It affects women more than men. Men are still able to continue to procreate if they so choose. And, your hormones are changing, your body's changing, you're starting to second guess choices you made in your life. Do I jump into a career? If you've stepped out of work, how do you get back into work? So how do you help women deal with those kind of feelings and navigating parenting?
And I think also there's the cultural value piece that, different for men than for women, that as we age, we culturally have less value. And so what does that mean? Like, not only am I done with my very active day-to-day parenting, but I'm getting culturally told I don't have cachet in the way that I did when I was younger. And, I think, and again, these are kind of gross generalizations, but especially for moms, part of parenting was, however that baby arrived in our arms when they were, little, we learned to put their needs and wants in front of anything for ourselves. So, a newborn that wakes up at 1:47 in the morning, like, of course, I'd rather be asleep, but I will absolutely be getting up. But it conditions us to quiet the voice of our needs and wants. And then that voice stays quiet for a really long time. And so by the time we actually have a little wiggle room to look at it again, the person we are isn't the person we were. And trying to, like, okay, I used to love wandering bookstores 20 something years ago. Is that something I'd even want to still do? And that is, there's uncertainty there. Sometimes it's joyful. It's like, oh, cool, I get a chance to find who I am again. But there is that sort of newness and hesitancy and unknowing. And years ago, I had a client whose partner said to her, I feel like I've lost you. And her reply was, I feel like I lost me too. And sort of out of that, I had already been kind of toying with it, but out of that grew, it's kind of a do-it-yourself class or workbook that I called Return to Me, that was all focused on, okay, where am I in all of this? And how do I rediscover/discover who I am at this point in my life?
It's tricky because I feel like I don't even know if, I'm still married to the husband I married in 2007. So we've been together since 2003. And so he's known me as a college student, as a young girl, and then but we've grown together. But if I were to go back and look and say, these are some things about me when I was younger that I want to bring back into my life, like, how does he look at that? Like, is there a disconnect because we're getting older is how do you handle if there's a divergence
Mm-hmm.
in what you see yourself as and what your spouse sees you as?
And I think so often, it's a great question. So often we look to the things we're going to do. Am I going to pursue this activity or this passion or this volunteer work or this profession? And gosh, how do these overlap with my partner? What we can do is say, what were the things we liked to do together? What were those things? Or what did I like to do? And what did you like to do? And why did we like them? What was the emotional payout that we got from doing those things? Was it a sense of adventure? Was it a sense of freedom? Was it a sense of connection? Was it a sense of autonomy? Was it a sense of, whatever the thing is? And then look for emotions that cross, right? So if both people remember that sense of adventure with longing, then yes, one person might be pursuing this professionally and somebody else might be pursuing this in the nonprofit or, volunteer realm, but we both remember the love of adventure, then that's where we nurture our connection and our togetherness and kind of regrow that strand of us.
Because there's a lot more time for togetherness as your
Yeah.
kids get older,
Yeah.
and when you're in the weeds, it's help me change a diaper or help me get this kid to preschool. And there's so many tasks that we delegate to each other. But then now it's, even when they're not even out of the house yet, but they're beginning to drive and they have that independence or they have friends that drive, and you're no longer tethered to a schedule of a teenager or a young adult, then all of a sudden you're sitting with all this time with your significant other that you didn't have before.
Well, and it's this kind of curved path of you started relationally, then you drift into transactionally based relationship with them, right? Like diaper change, carpool schedule, which activity are we doing? So it's like we're deeply embedded in relationship in the beginning, and then it's like almost all transactional for a while, and then we're trying to reinvent the relationship again. And I mean, it really is dating each other again. That can be one of the really fun things to do.
Yeah. Or scary.
Yes, absolutely.
It can be scary because I know some women who I've talked to as clients or as friends that have said, when we were younger, we were this, and then we were doing the kid activities. And now that we're older, we aren't the same people and we don't like the same things. And that can be kind of scary too, because then you don't have the kids at home
as the buffer in the center of it, right? I think of it as if you think about like a family statue that, in the beginning, our statue is us facing our partner. Like they are our whole world, right? And then as we come out of that initial honeymoon phase, we sort of start kind of opening up, and they're sort of side by side. Then when we have kids, the kids are sort of standing between us. Mm-hmm. And then when the kids leave, there's this distance between us. And so, when our kids are younger, if we have the wisdom to do it, one of the things to think about is, all right, we don't want the statue to be everybody in a line. We always want to be in a circle so that the parents are still holding hands, no matter how many kids come between us. But, to your point, you're exactly right that it is scary. And, sociologists now have a whole category that they've named the gray divorce, the divorces that happen once kids are launched, because we do find ourselves in very different places and as very different people.
Oh, okay. So we've talked about relationships with our spouses, and we've talked about, managing our emotions with our kids and letting them, separate a little bit from us. And what are some boundaries that you suggest women set with their young adults? Because it's easy when you have children who you've helped all along the way, and then they launch and they're nervous, or it's not going how they intended, or maybe they chose a major they're not interested in anymore, or maybe they don't want to be in college anymore. How do we set boundaries with them so that they can still be independent people. We want them to be able to live without us, and that's the goal. And we need to be our own people at that point too. So what do you suggest for women out there who find that it's starting to get muddled again? There's the separation and they're coming back. Yeah.
Right. They come home for a weekend and it's like, do I do your laundry for you or don't I? Right. Do I give you money for pizza with your friends or don't I? Do you move back in with us? And if that happens, what does that contribution look like? Right. Like you're not 10 again. You don't just get to live with us kind of rent free there, like now you need to be contributing to the family in a different way. I think that one of the pieces to think about, and it is, as much as we may have made fun of our grandparents who said things like, I walked uphill both ways in the snow to go to school. Our kids experienced far less of what is called distress tolerance, right? Lots of kids did not learn to tie their shoe at 4, right? They had Velcro, they had slip-ons. So they never had to sit there with chubby little fingers that took a really long time to learn how to tie a shoe. So they didn't build this distress tolerance, right? Or if they're bored in a car, so many vehicles now have screens in them, or parents bring iPads with them. And so they're not looking out the window and playing the license plate game or the alphabet game. Again, it's that idea of distress tolerance. And those may seem like really small examples, but over the course of a lifetime, if you don't build distress tolerance, then when things are uncomfortable, we don't know how to be comfortable in discomfort. And so then when they have a freshman year roommate that they don't like, or an internship that isn't their thing, or a major that they decide they want to change, the emotional discomfort, they don't know how to do that regulation work for their central nervous system to stay calm in that discomfort. So one of the boundaries to draw is to think about, is my kiddo in danger or are they in discomfort? Because if they're in discomfort, I will hang with you in this space. I'll have the conversations. I will listen. I will emotionally support you, but it's not my job to rescue you because you're not in danger, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And sometimes people are like, well, how do I know what's the line of danger? And I would say that when you feel like your kiddo doesn't have hope anymore, that's when we step in and rescue.
Okay. Because they need to learn how to fail forward.
Yes,
it's a really important thing.
Yeah.
And not to go morbid, but at some point in time, we will no longer be here. And so they need to be able to self-sustain and have a productive life. I don't think any parent would want to take care of their children so much that when they are gone, they can't sustain themselves.
Totally. And I think the piece, this isn't like it is storming with hurricane force winds and we're shoving them out the door and locking the door and saying like, suck it up, buttercup. You got to get distress tolerance. It's, it's not our job to create trauma or neglect. Distress tolerance is us standing beside them so that they know no matter how big those uncomfortable emotions are, it's okay to feel those feelings. They're still safe, even in the bigness of the distress.
Yeah, I tell Maddie, my oldest, when we talk about going off into the world, I always tell her, I want you to have adventures and take risks, even big risks, because they know that if they do need a soft place to land, they have home and they have me and their father. But I worry that the soft place to land becomes an easy place to land. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be an easy button. Mm-hmm. That's where I get worried that I haven't made them capable enough to notice that they're trying to hit an easy button.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't need it yet.
Yeah. And I think it's that idea of it's a safety net, not a safety nest. So It's like, we'll catch you and we'll help you. And you can kind of pause here for a while before you go back out. But this isn't the condo to move back into kind of thing.
I love them both, but I don't need them living with me when they're 35. Yeah. And, they need to have their own adventures.
Yeah.
I think that's important. So if we've been a mom for 18 years is typically, 17, 18 years when they go off to school. And all of a sudden our role of mother is no longer what it used to be. That can be really difficult for women to accept. And, I fear that moment. And I wonder, when people ask me what I do, the first thing I say is I'm a stay-at-home mom. So how do we accept that? And how do we find ways to feel better about our role, or also accept that we need to change our role?
Yeah. So I think there are sort of two pieces emotionally to it. There's the privileged joy of it, right? That, gosh, our kid did launch, our kid did go on, whatever it may be. There's also the ambiguous grief of it. And, that idea of like, I'm so thrilled they're doing it. I'm so proud of what they're out in the world accomplishing. And it comes at my loss. Like, I don't just get to offer you a piece of sourdough toast for breakfast. I don't get to just hear the garage door go up and know that you're home. And it's those little moments that when they go can feel like our lives get quieter. It's a little bit like the Wizard of Oz at the end when she goes back to Kansas and it's like, oh, she had this beautiful, colorful adventure and now it's going back to those sepia tones. And I think part of it is saying to ourselves, I get to be the girl who goes on an adventure now too. That we have been the hearth and the home and the steady place for our kids, and that them going off in the world actually is our permission slip for us to go off into the world as well.
But still be allowed to grieve a little bit.
We
I
have
need some time to sit in my grief.
Absolutely. We absolutely have to grieve because it's loss. And the hard part about ambiguous grief is that it's kind of the grief with no name. It's the grief of, when someone is deployed, it's the grief of the person who's home, waiting for word, waiting to know if they're okay, right? It's in a friendship, if we get ghosted, or a relationship, the unknowing of like, why did this end? And I don't know what the heck happened. That's that ambiguous grief. And so, yeah, we absolutely have to make room for it. And it's, that whole first year after a kiddo goes. So all those first anniversaries of things, and know also that it's not intellectual, right? It's emotional, and our bodies track the weather. They track the slant of the sunlight. And so weeks before a kid's birthday that we sort of are tracking on the calendar, our body will start tracking it. And so you'll start to feel prickly or a little bit sad or just edgy. And it's like, what the heck is going on? And then it's like, oh, this is this upcoming holiday and my kid's not going to be home for it. And really making space to grieve that.
I haven't even thought about the holidays yet. I was envisioning, I had a conversation with a mom from the dance world who had dancers that both, like, her dancers just left together. And she was telling me that the hairpins, that she used to find hairpins everywhere. We find them in the cup holders in the car. We find them in the vacuum. We find them in the washing machine. And then all of a sudden we stop finding the hairpins.
Yep.
And it's this moment of, they're really gone.
Mm-hmm.
And that can take a while for you to stop finding the hairpins. But I use that as my visualization of what it's going to be like, is that I will continue to find hairpins. And then at some point I won't anymore.
Yeah. For me, it's shoes in the front hall, and for years it's like, put your shoes away. And now I don't care, because I feel like shoes in the front hall is this symbol that you're still with me. And I may want it to look nice and neat, but when it is going to be nice and neat, means you're not here with me anymore. So, all the shoes in the front hall. I'm happy for it.
Yeah. It's the backpack that sits on the counter. We have the island, and she sits the backpack on the bar stool. Even if it's a Friday, it's like, you're not going to be doing any schoolwork. Move the backpack. And it drives me bonkers, but I guarantee you in 3 years, I will miss that backpack sitting in that chair.
Yep. Yeah. The other thing to know personally, because you're still on the other side of it, is when they get their driver's license, it is both this great freedom for them, for us, but it's also a step towards that loss, because now your internal compass is less geared to theirs. It's sort of like, oh, you're getting yourself to school or you're getting yourself to your activities. So you're not as tethered to that activity. And so that helps a little bit. So it's, again, less of a cliff drop off, because it's like, oh yeah, you're off doing your thing.
That's a nice weaning process.
It is. It is, truly. And I think, going back to something we talked about earlier in terms of when they, you feel them plop on your bed at 10 o'clock at night, we want to make sure we have extra of those opportunities, because that time in the car really was a time when they would self-disclose. And really, anytime our kids are shoulder to shoulder with us versus sitting across the table talking to us, when we're making eye contact, it's always a hierarchical assessment. Who has power? What's going on? But if we're shoulder to shoulder in the car, in the dark, saying goodnight, on a walk, those are all times and places kids are going to tell us more. So if you've got a kiddo that you're worried about, take them on a drive and say to them, like, you know what, we're going to go do a big loop of, side roads today. And all of our electronics are going in the back seat, right? And just hang out and chat, and your kid will self-disclose a lot more. So then when they're driving on their own, we don't get those kind of day-to-day glimpses of what their life looks like. And it is sort of this weaning process for what comes next.
Oh, I'm not ready. I'm not, we started the driver's ed and she's already driving with me, and I'm excited for her. And I do enjoy, she prefers sometimes to be in the passenger seat, because then she can have, her cup of her latte and she can sit there and listen to music. So I will take any of those times. And I've always told her, having your license is freedom, but that doesn't necessarily mean I won't drive you. So
yeah, absolutely.
I think that that's also a good weaning process. Like I can let her go in bits and pieces, but not completely. And you were talking about your Return to Me program, and that, could you tell me a little bit more about that for anyone who's listening who thinks I really need to work on, my self-discovery. My kid is leaving at the end of the summer and I need to start focusing back on myself. So how does that work?
So it's on my website, which is evolving-parents.com. One of the tabs has classes. It's the Return to Me one. It's a downloadable, it's a PDF. I don't even know, a stack of pages. You print it out so that you can write and draw. And there are it's kind of workbook format. So there's spaces to write right in the document itself. And it's framed, it's sort of like telescopes and microscopes, or front yards and backyards. And so it's sort of this, how do I look forward and how do I look back all at the same time, so that we're pulling who we were as young girls through to who we are now, as a way to kind of uncover, who we are. And, some people like doing it on their own. Some people like gathering a group of their friends to do it. One group did it as a group and then had me come and join them one night. And we all talked about, what they all had kind of uncovered about themselves. There's an opportunity for some colored pencil work if you want to, scissors and glue if you want to. There's lots of sort of optional activities throughout it to try to just help us go deep, but feel supported while we're doing that, and also have it be lighthearted to, kind of counterbalance the deep reflection piece.
That's wonderful, because I think we lose the coloring and the activity portion of ourselves as moms. And, I was listening to a podcast a while back, and a woman was asked, what do you do for fun? And she had a hard time figuring out what fun even was anymore. And I know, if I had something going on for a weekend, my husband might take the kids to go go-karting, or to go see a Mariners game, or they go to a cracking game. Like, they always had activities and they were having fun. And I thought, I'm kind of like, you guys do all this fun stuff when I'm busy and I'm not around. And then when I'm home while you're traveling, I'm doing the dance and I'm doing the homework. And so what I got to do with kids when my spouse was gone for work is all transactional, busy work. But then the dads had all this fun, and then they still can bring out parts of themselves that are fun with the kids. And I don't know, I feel like, I don't know if it's society or the roles that we're given, but I feel like that search of fun is hard.
It's really hard. And it's the burden of, the work and the mental load that we carry. It's also an interesting byproduct of the way we get acculturated as when we're kids, that, one of the gifts we tend to give girls is emotional intelligence, checking in with your friends, talking about how you're feeling, that connective work, which is vital to our mental health. We acculturate boys to have a third piece to the experience. They go shoot hoops together. They go watch a game together. For a lot of guys, some of them love sports because they love sports, but some of them love sports because that was the avenue through which they got connection to a father figure or whatever. But it trained them to do stuff, which is also important to our mental health. What we want to be able to do for our kids is give them both experiences. So part of what happens, your family experience is a great example, is you're doing all of that emotional touchstone work with them, providing, making sure they're ready to go, getting the homework done, keeping that piece going. He's doing all of the play-based stuff. We're going to do this activity, but we never kind of learned how to, it was never our job description to figure out go-karts, right? Like when we were in high school, we had sleepovers or we would all hang out and talk to each other. We weren't going to do those events. Even now as moms, what do we tend to do, right? We gather, we go out to dinner, we gather, we go, wine tasting, or we gather, we go get coffee or go for a walk. Those are all focused on one another. They're not necessarily focused on the event we're trying to attend. So yeah, it's sort of like, do I want to go to concerts? Jamie Lee Curtis, I saw a clip of her recently when she said, I really wish people would realize, musicians and artists, that there's a whole group of us that would love to go to matinee concerts. And I was like, yes.
Yeah. I don't want to be downtown driving home at 12 o'clock in the morning or, 11 o'clock at night. Yep. You sign me up for a 2:00 concert where it's still daylight when I'm leaving. I will attend. Yep. Actually, we went to the Hollywood Bowl and we had one of those experiences, cool. And it was wonderful because it was a concert while it was still daylight. And I thought, this is amazing. We should have these more, all across the country. And when you were talking about the activities, I had this moment where I thought about when women think about a weekend away together, it's like, let's rent a house on the coast.
Yes.
And when boys, like my husband just got back from someone's birthday weekend and they raced cars, they went to a baseball game, they did a couple other activities that were definitely very activity focused.
Yep.
You can't really race a car and have a deep, wholehearted conversation over a walkie while you've got somebody telling you, to go fast and brake and whatever. But they had a great time. And he comes back recharged and happy and fulfilled and ready to go back to work with a gusto. And if I have a weekend where I could just sit on a couch with a blanket and a cup of hot tea and just connect with women, that really gets me ready to go back to being the mom that I need to be. So it's very interesting.
And it's that piece of both, right? So it's like saying to friends, like, all right, let's go to the beach for a weekend and let's see if there's a place to drive go-karts while we're there, right? So that we're also generating experience, because that's part of the next chapter of our lives, is not just who do I want to be, but what do I want to do?
Okay. Yeah. So we need to dig into our, ask the men in our lives, what are some things you would do if you had free time? And then what piques an interest and go try it ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And it might be going to a museum or going to a, whatever, but finding those. And I think the other piece is, as moms, we tend to be the holder of serious. And so it's like, oh, all right, what's going to bring joy? What's going to bring lightness? What's going to be funny? What's going to be silly, right? Like when was the last time any of us honestly said, well, I want to do something silly this weekend?
Yeah, I talked to a couple moms about doing a private adult hip hop class at
Yes.
our dance studio.
Yep.
And they all were really like, oh yeah, that'd be so much fun. But when I actually got into, okay, well, I'm going to talk to the studio about availability, then it was like, oh, I'm not really sure I'm ready to, wiggle all my bits and pieces. So there is still that hesitancy that I find in a lot of women.
And I mean, that's a really good point, because that hesitancy is part of what happens as our kids launch. Is we had this professional life, we worked really hard at it, we got really good at it. We had this parenting life, we worked really hard at it, we were good at it, no matter what happens with our kids. I mean, the dedication was always there. Now I have to start over. Like, how do I go back to not being good at things and be okay with that? Like, how do I return to beginner's mind and be open to, like, whatever I pick next, I might suck at that for the first year, and allow that to be true.
Yeah. The imposter syndrome is really hard to get over as women, I think. And, even so, this podcast, I secured this name for this podcast 3 years ago. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I really want to do it. And then I've been so afraid of, will people want to talk to me? Do people want to listen to me? Do I have enough interesting things that are on my mind that people would find value in? And so I just held off because I was nervous that I'm like, I just don't know if I can do this. But now that I do have more free time because my kids are getting older and having more independence, it's like, I'm just going to do it. And if it runs its course, then it ran its course. But if it continues to be something that I can do well beyond them still being in the house, then good. But the risk of failure is really terrifying.
Mm-hmm. And, the same risk of failure that you say to your kids, like, go and try things and it's okay if you fail. It's good for us to remember that at this age too, right? That failure isn't about just when you're in your 20s or maybe in your 30s. It's about always stretching ourselves just that little bit past our balance point to see what happens.
Yeah. Some people that I've seen are just turning into authors and writing novels or opening businesses. They're in their late 40s, early 50s. And I think there's a lot of people out there who, they discredit women in this age bracket for being viable, successful, interesting humans. There's that irrelevance and invisibility that comes as we age because, youth and beauty are so driven in our society. But there's some remarkable women out there who are doing amazing things, and they're not 20.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's that piece of like, disregard them at your peril, because these are bright women who've learned life's wisdom. They now have more time and they're ready to be heard.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that's a great place for us to actually end our conversation today. I think I would talk to you, Emily, for hours and hours and hours. And I think, whenever we were downstairs in the theater, I would be afraid that you would miss your cue if you were talking at our table. I would hate to be on the receiving end of our director saying, right, where is she? And we're all just enjoying each other's company. So, but it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
This was delightful. And anytime, either again on the podcast or out for coffee, I would just love to continue the conversation.
I agree. And I hope a lot of women feel that they want to continue this conversation. And if they're ready to start digging into getting more creative, they can find your Return to Me program on your website. You also work with clients one-on-one. So, you are a blessing to anyone who comes in contact with you. So I'm really happy that we did this. And thank you so much for taking the time.
It was really a treasure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here.
Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll be back next week for another episode of Women Mastering Midlife. Until then, find us on Instagram at Women Mastering Midlife and join my free Facebook community, Women Mastering Midlife, to continue our discussions. If you have any questions that you'd like answered on an Ask Me Anything episode, send your emails to hello@missvictoriabird.com.